everybody, and you're sending out status mails. As soon as every meeting is done, you send out an email saying, "Oh, here's what we discussed in the meeting, and here's the actions of who's doing what." And that's so as a program manager, you're generating all this status. And it's important to have all this data so everybody involved knows what's going on, and they see that you seem to be in control of this. So you must be the one who's driving things. You're the leader. So it helps you keep your leadership role by doing all of the status, and it makes sure that everybody's on track with what's happening, and it keeps and as I said, because it's a matrix organization, it just takes a lot of effort to keep all these different groups on the same page, because everybody could easily drift off. Because you can, not only do you have to make sure your group agrees on what you're doing, but almost invariably, any new product release you're working on, any product you're working on, will require that other groups in the company, other engineering teams, make commitments to do things for you to succeed. And so you have to make sure, not only do you have to, at the very beginning of the whole project, make sure that they agree to that, and that they say, yeah, we think this is a good idea for us to do, but all the way through the thing, you have to make sure you're constantly working with them, that they're on track with this. Because if you don't, I've seen it happen. They kind of go off on their own, and this wasn't a priority for them. They say, oh gosh, we just didn't really get to that. And so now you're screwed because they didn't finish some things that you really needed for your product to work, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's why it is important to do all of this. Now, I will say Microsoft has created a lot of tools internally, IT tools, databases, bug systems, to help you do a lot of this tracking. But then a lot of your job is doing data entry. You're entering in the status of these things into these tools, so that then managers or anybody can go and look. They can look at the whole project and see the red and green and where things are. But it gets more than that. It's like there's all this process that's come in where all throughout they'll say, well, this phase in the project you have to have made sure you've had legal reviews on things, and so then you have to have made sure you talk to lawyers and you got those checked in, and you have to input this into the database system. Yes, I've got the legal check off, and then you submit the documents that legal sent, and then you have to have security reviews, and you have to make sure you got the security things in there. So there's all these checklists of things you have to do to get your product done. So these tools, they help, but they also create work too, and so I mean, this may sound like I'm super negative on Microsoft, but I really enjoyed my 9 years there. I learned a lot, but there is a lot of bureaucracy, and to a certain extent, I think it's unavoidable, because particularly, and again, I've stressed, I was in the Windows division, which is likely the biggest, most complicated software product on the planet, and there's no way you can go through a product release without a heck of a lot of coordination and process to make sure everything is lining up properly. But so there, I accept there's a reality that you have this, but it's not always fun either. So as a program manager, you typically will have a weekly meeting with all the key players of the project or product that you're working on. And when I say key players, these are things you identify who they are. You have to have identified who are the teams that I have deliverables that I need to have doing things for me. Then you make sure they're invited. You need if you're really relying on marketing to help get some things ready so that they're ready when this thing ships, you should have a marketing person involved. In my case, I kept trying to get marketing people to come to my meetings. They wouldn't, so I tried. And then likewise, you want even documentation people. Get the documentation people coming. Have them come to the meetings. It's great to have them involved in knowing what's going on, so that they can they know the earlier you get them involved, the better. In fact, I've even had documentation people help me drive engineering efforts through the company in a way. When I was working on the Windows firewall, it became obvious that one of the things that people would need to know when we put the firewall on Windows Server, administrators would need to know what they would need, how to configure the firewall for the various things they would want to do, because you'd have to open the right ports and configure it for the various services. And so I did a little sales job. I convinced the documentation person that it was in his interest to create a database to track all of the different things that would need to be configured for the firewall. Then he spun up a whole project to go to all of the different groups in the Windows Server and he built forms in a database that would ask them, what are your networking requirements that you need so that we can put this in the firewall? And then I used that data that he collected to build things for the firewall to make automatic configuration easier. So there's ways that you can leverage these people and work with them. So program managers are conformists. And you're expected to execute the vision and ideas of your managers and above, which sounds like this is contradicting my earlier point about it being a consensus organization. It is consensus within some general guidance things. And I'll give an example. One of the things I was working on as a program manager was IPv6, which is a new version of the Internet Protocol. Most everybody all the time uses IPv4. That's what most of the Internet, anytime you're doing web browsing or anything, it's almost always over IPv4. IPv6 is the next version of that. It's in Windows. Most operating systems have it now, but it's usually not being used because the Internet itself doesn't use much IPv6. But it's there for whenever the Internet really starts using it in a big way. Well, there's a lot of questions as to whether IPv6 is something that one could argue, why sink a lot of resources into it since it's not really being used by anybody? But I know there were management directives saying this is something we need to support. We need to support IPv6. And so people who want it would not be a good career decision to go around saying we shouldn't be working with IPv6 and trying to build a case around not working with IPv6. That just wouldn't help you any. It was clear that this was something that senior managers wanted to do, and to go against that would well, ultimately, if you're such a good salesman that you can convince everybody that you're right, then I guess you would be aligned with your senior managers because they're aligned too. But I'll put it another way. It's easier to build consensus when you're going with the momentum of the broader organization. If the thing you want to do some of your ideas as a program manager doesn't mesh with the general culture or ideas of the broader organization that you're in, it's just a much bigger job to try to then realign everybody to build that consensus around the new thing. So it's just easier to build consensus around areas that people want to go. I'm sure I've likely confused you all, but that's how it felt to me. And a question in the back?
How do you know what they want?
So the question is, how do you know what people want?
No, the decision makers. Do they actually say?
So the question is, how do you know what decision makers want? Do they tell you what they want? And they do, in some general terms. They'll say there's certain things they like or they're excited about, and with some VPs, they're more clear than others around some of those things. So yes, there are cases where you know what there are some hot buttons they have of things they like. And so it's always in your interest to cater to those things that they like and be working on those things. And things that go against that, it's just a much bigger uphill struggle to try to change those kinds of things. But it's hard to describe, but there are currents of ideas that flow in certain directions. And I use IPv6 as an example again. There was no question that almost all the engineers and everybody, most of the people in networking